Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I have been looking forward to this conversation for months. We are going to be talking to Samantha Sonnet. Let me tell you a bit about Sam, and then she'll share her story with you. But I mean, her resume, her history is so incredibly impressive. She served for over 20 years in the NYPD. She's worked in counterterrorism, training specialty units in chemical and biological warfare. She also worked with Homeland Security and trained first responders and the DoD on hazmat and WMD response. I don't even know what that means, so we're going to hear from her because this is just incredible, and I'm so happy that our paths have crossed. Sam, thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
Yes, and I know that it took a lot for you to be here. You just got out of surgery. Hence, for anyone who's watching the video, what I think is a gorgeous look.
You do?
You really pull it off.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. It's been a fun experiment, Never had a good excuse to go bald for a little while and see what it's like.
Sam, I just read that little bit about you. Can you, though, walk us through your journey, your profession, how it started and where you are now?
Sure. Yeah. I actually started out in the military. And then at the end of my contract there, I wasn't really sure what I was going to do. And the NYPD was hiring. So I jumped on board. And, it's funny because I love the mountains, and the city is the last place that I thought I would end up. But, life pulls you places, and they picked me up really quick. And next thing I knew, I was in the police academy. And from there, I don't know, I kind of fell in love with it, fell in love with the city and the people. I fell in love with the people I worked with. It went really fast in a lot of ways, but I spent, around a decade on patrol. I was out in the street. I did investigations. I ended up in family violence, investigating those cases, which are really heartbreaking, like child abuse cases, elder abuse cases. We actually helped change the strangulation laws in New York City to make strangulation a felony charge, like up there with attempted murder, which wasn't the case before. And I brought the first case of strangulation to the city, and we went to trial. And then from there, my background was in counterterrorism. I was really interested in it after 9/11. I wanted to understand more about it. So I went to school for counterterrorism at John Jay College. And I got picked up by the counterterrorism division. And from there, I really kind of oddly fell in love with the chemical and biological warfare side of things. It was super interesting to me. I love to read and research. So for me, it was like the perfect field to fall into because you could study that all day, every day, and there would always be something more to know or learn because it's constantly evolving and changing too. So I dove right in. I tend to go overboard on things. I got like hundreds of certifications in it, and then just helped the NYPD form up their program or bring their program a little more up to date. And that caught the attention of the federal government, and the feds, they picked me up a few years ago. So now I kind of do the same thing. I just do it all around the country now for, anywhere from first responders to oil workers to the Department of Defense. So that's where I'm at. I'm about to retire, and a bit of a medical battle ahead of me, but nothing, hopefully that's too crazy in the end. And that's where I'm at.
Sam, like we live in a culture where we're so enamored by superheroes and heroes and even like murder mysteries or watching like Dateline, and here we are speaking to you and you are the real life hero. Like you are what we watch on TV and what we kind of feel awe for, but you also don't get the same recognition as say the Hollywood actors for what you do. I guess what I'm trying to say here is that so many of us know that there are people behind the scenes who are literally every day there to protect us and to save our lives. And we don't often have a face to that person. And that person often doesn't get the recognition that they really deserve. And I'm speaking to you and all of your colleagues. So I just want to take a moment to say thank you for your service and the way that you've showed up for us. Even if, you're doing it every day without the recognition that I feel like you truly deserve. It's incredible to hear your story. And you can't hear that story without acknowledging the personal sacrifices that come when every day you're faced with dealing with really tough cases, things that most people don't want to look at every day. How did you find that impacting your mental health and the mental health of your colleagues?
I feel like I see a lot of the same pattern, or I noticed, especially with the NYPD. That's really the only department I can talk about. But what I saw happen was you had and this happened with me too. You had a bunch of younger, we're all young. I was 21 years old, most of us are pretty young. It's a young person's job. And you start off super excited. You're like, this is going to be great. And you never wanted really the cubicle job. And you love the idea of showing up and every day could be different and what adventures lay before you. And you start off really gung-ho. And then you start to realize after maybe your second year, you start to get a little bit depressed in a way. You are tired. You're starting to see things, and it's not like the movies or TV. It's like you're seeing these things in real life, and you're seeing a lot of it. I mean, you can see multiple things a day where you're like, whoa, holy moly. And you go from one to the next. And next thing you know, you start to change a little. Your views on the world and everything starts to change, and you go home and you try to talk about it with your friends or your family or even a spouse. And they're so appalled by the things you're saying, and the reaction you get a lot of the time makes you want to not talk to them about it. So instead, what we tend to do is we rely more on the units that we're in, and you feel normal there. You feel like it's people who understand. We develop a really dark sense of humor, which gets us through. And then instead of going home, sometimes you're like, oh, I'm just going to go out with my squad. I'm going to go out with the guys, And then that starts happening more and more. And there's this gap that starts to form between everyone else and you and work and your work people. And the work people become like family too. But then the hours continue to be crazy. There's never a break. You never have a chance to decompress. And by the time I hit my 10th year, I was so burnt out that I knew I needed to leave the street. Because I would be at work for 3 days at a time. Or, when I did investigations, I would have 4,000 complaints that I needed to go through that year. 4,000 people and it was just me. The unit was a lot of the time just me. So, the demand was huge, and you're trying to prioritize people. You're like, all right, well, these people could have a life-threatening case. These people probably not. And you're categorizing people into these piles that you don't want to create. You want to be able to be there for all of them. And then you're like, well, I can't take a day off work. Who's going to take over my cases? I'm going to fall so far behind. There's no one to do my work. It has to be me that's working the case. And next thing you know, you're just never leaving work, and you're bringing it home with you. And then you're thinking about it. And you can't pull away. You can't, you just feel like you can't decompress. And after a decade of that, it really started to weigh on me. I'm like, I need a change. I need a break. And that's when counterterrorism picked me up. So it was perfect timing. It was I thought about it so much that the world, I pulled it to me, and I was able to change into this new position. And the odd thing that happened is once I was in this position where I was no longer really working the street, my body started to go through extreme withdrawal. I'm not an adrenaline junkie by any means. I'm not jumping out of airplanes, or if it's a perfectly good plane, I will fight to the death to stay in it. I don't go out seeking things like that. But my body was craving adrenaline, and it was becoming so irritating because you don't realize how many adrenaline dumps you get in a day when you're out there working. And I started to get so irritable. And that's when I started to realize I had post-traumatic stress injury, I would say, over disorder. And all the things that I had buried for the last 10 years had started to have a chance to surface. And I didn't understand what was happening.
The first time we ever spoke, you shared that when you got to that point, you turned to conventional therapy and the therapist asked you to do something. Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, I ended up trying to find a therapist. I stuck with whoever my insurance would cover. And I went to this woman, and she was probably the worst therapist that ever. And she just kept telling me that I needed to journal. She's like, you need to write about all these things. Like, write about all those traumatic experiences. And I'm like, do you know how long it's going to take me to write about each traumatic experience over the last decade? I'm like, it would take me like books.
Because you would have multiple in a day.
Oh, yeah. I mean, my brain would reel to so many different ones that I was like, I don't even know where to begin. But I wanted to get better, so I tried. I was writing and writing and writing, and the more I wrote, the worse I felt. And I felt like I was going deeper and deeper into this hole where it was just this terrible feeling. And I was like, this is not working. There has got to be a better way. And I started to look around, and that's when I found a therapist that specialized in something called biofeedback. He's a great, great guy. His name's Kurt McKinley. And Kurt taught me about how trauma is stored in the brain. And since I'm a researcher, of course, I dove in, and I started to really learn about how these traumatic experiences literally can cause basically an injury to the nervous system. And I learned that I had to calm my nervous system. I had to teach my nervous system to calm back down and to tell it it's okay. Because it's just trying to keep me alive, right? It's just trying to keep me amped up because I'm so used to threats coming at me that I just had to teach it that it's okay to unwind and to relax. And he told me to download an app called the Tapping Solutions. And I was like, what's that? And I listened to Kurt because Kurt's I just love him. I have a lot of respect for him and his work. And I was like, all right. So I downloaded it and I started with your app, and it became one of my main 3 go-tos to help calm my nervous system. And I still use it very much to this day.
What was your first experience that made you go, wow, tapping works?
The first time I went to do it, I had to learn how to do it, and which wasn't hard. I mean, the explanation on the app was great. I think for me, I had to be open to it. Because we get this, you're really kind of indoctrinated into this mentality, whether it's military or law enforcement or any first responder, really, that you just suck it up. You just deal with it. There's none of this. You don't need the meditation and the this and the that. That's all frilly, nilly, hippie, nonsense. That you just tough it out. And it's hard to break that wall down and to be like, no, I can have a talk with myself. I can find my center. I can calm my nervous system. These things do work and they are important. And once I kind of put that wall down of my own ego, really, and I let it in, then I realized that it really worked amazingly. And it helped me learn to meditate. It helped me learn to, do deep breathing exercises. And it took a long time. It's not like I tapped and I was fine. It took I had to, when I first started, I probably tapped maybe 12 times a day. Anytime I started to get that spike in adrenaline or that craving for it, I would tap and I would tell my body, it's okay. You're all right. And over time, it healed. And all of my post-traumatic stress went away. I very rarely have any issue with it at all. And if I do, I tap.
Yeah.
Or deep breathing or binaural beats. I do all those things.
It's incredible to hear that because when we have that panic come up, it is such a physical experience that when we don't have a tool, we can feel really trapped within our own head and within our body. Like there is a sense of lack of control when that comes up. And so the fact that, yes, in the beginning you had to do it 12 times a day, but it meant every time you were having that reaction, which you were living with before and struggling through, you had something to immediately do to calm your nervous system.
Yeah, and it's quick. Like sometimes I would just do your microbursts and they're 3 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Like who can't take 3 minutes, And I would do it. And it would just be, that would be enough.
Yes. Yeah. When we started sharing tapping, I was very surprised that we started to hear a lot from veterans and active members in the military. They would write in. I remember this one story of someone went to a Walmart and they were triggered. And so they stopped and they started tapping, like right there in an aisle. And then someone walked by and said, "Keep tapping, brother, it works." It was another military member. And so they sent us this message. And this was very early on. And my brothers and I were so touched by that, and also found it, well, I guess I found it curious. Like I didn't expect that. I didn't expect that veterans and active military members would be the ones that are emailing us. Why do you think it's something that group has found to be so helpful in particular?
Well, a lot of us tend to be a little hesitant to go to therapists because like experiences like my first one, wasn't a good experience. You're like, even once you finally, it's hard to get yourself there to begin with because we worry. We worry that our job will find out. We worry that, they'll take our guns away or they'll take us off the street. It can really affect your career because, sometimes our medical records and stuff aren't even private. Like, so you're like, oh, this can't be reported to my insurance because if it's in my insurance, then my job might find out. I got to pay out of pocket and then it's really expensive out of pocket. And then you're like, oh, never mind. Like, I need that money for my family or whatever. So to actually get to a therapist to begin with is usually a significant challenge and a big step. And if that's not a good therapist who doesn't know what they're doing, it can be a really detrimental one, and then people don't go back. So this is an option that I'm not saying that, if you need a therapist, go find a therapist, but this is something that you can do on your own, one-on-one, just with the app or however you want to do it. And it's available to you. And it's something that can truly, truly help without all of that stigma of, therapy. So for me, it worked really well. I mean, I still ended up going to Kurt, but I only started seeing him maybe like we dripped down to like once every 2 months or once every 3 months. But it wasn't a huge part. Once I learned these techniques, I could kind of take it from there. And that was big.
Yeah, that is big. That's so empowering. When we first connected, we started talking about creating tapping meditations, which we have, which are in the app. Anyone can use the app for free for 2 weeks and unlock everything. We have 30 free tapping meditations all the time. But the thing I'm most proud of is we have a section for first responders that is always unlocked. It is always free. Everything that you created with us is accessible to anybody. One of the things that you said is why it was so important to have somebody who is in it, who is actually in your position creating these type of tapping meditations. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, we tend to, we as like a first responder community, we tend to shy away from any kind of input or like options that come from outside of us because we're like, there's no way that you understand. Like there's things you have to live and experience. And a lot of guys that I've talked to who have tried to go to therapy, or even when I tried to go, you start telling these stories, and a lot of the time the therapist looks at you like, whoa, like you feel like the therapist needs therapy now. Like when you shock the therapist and they're like, whoa, that's a lot, you're like, oh God, like, here we go again. You don't want to tell the person for the same reason you didn't want to tell the family or the spouse, because that reaction, which is a normal reaction, when you hear traumatic things. But when you're trying to work through it, you don't want that. So for it to come from someone else who's walked those shoes, who's been there, there's a lot that comes with that. There's like a trust and a respect and an understanding, like, all right, you know what I'm going through. And I think that's important in this.
No, it's been incredible to collaborate with you because you were able to give insights for these tapping meditations that only you could. Only someone who's living it knows exactly what you need. And so I just want to quickly mention the few that we've created together: decompress after a shift, grounded and focused before a shift, mid-shift reset, burnout recovery, and then unwind for a restful sleep. They're all phenomenal. Is there one that stands out to you as maybe the most helpful or the one to start with that you would recommend?
For me, burnout is the biggest thing. I mean, burnout is something I think almost all of us can relate to. Whether you're a parent or you're a nurse or a doctor, or no matter what you're doing, the life has become so fast-paced. There's just not a lot of time, and we don't make a lot of time for ourselves. And especially when you're in law enforcement, like, you're pumping out these crazy hours, right? You're in these high intense situations. Maybe you got to eat, maybe you didn't, or maybe you ate like on the fly, or there's barely time to do anything else, right? Except do your job. And then you get in your car, and a lot of the time you're headed home to be a parent or to be a spouse. Like, you go home, all right, well, now my kids, they got to go to practice, or maybe I'm the coach for the team, and then you're like, boom, and now I got to make dinner. And then next thing you know, it's like 10 o'clock at night, and you finally get like maybe a glass of wine in you or whatever. And you're like, oh my God, now it's like 11 and I got to go to bed. But now I'm you're at that level of exhaustion where you just can't really sleep well. And then your brain's going about all the things that you have to do the next day. And you're looking at the clock and you're like, oh my God, my alarm's going to go off at 5 o'clock. Like, how many hours of sleep is that? Okay, that's 12, 1, 2. Okay. Is that enough time, And then by the time like the morning, the alarm goes off, you're like, oh my God, like I feel like I just closed my eyes. This can't be real. This can't be my alarm. And it is. And you get up and you do it again.
Yeah.
So eventually that burns your body out.
Yes.
And that has all kinds of repercussions. It has repercussions mentally. It can destroy your home life. You become very agitated. You don't have room for anything, time for anything. And, it's why we have a massive divorce rate. I think we're up to 75. It depends on what study you look at, 70 to 75% divorce rate. We lead the country in metabolic disease, obesity, depression, anxiety. Like, our numbers are so alarming that our lifespan is about 20 years shy of the national average. I think the actual number is 18 years shy, but almost 20.
Wow.
And something has to give.
Yes. Yes. Well, and it's layered, right? Because I hear what you're saying and I think, well, the first thing is we have to give more resources to those who are showing up for us, and we have to do something with the schedule itself. And I know it's a very difficult, it's getting harder and harder, to also recruit people who are willing to put their life on the line and do this kind of work. And so something fundamental needs to change. And then also, if you're not given the resources to decompress after a shift, if you're going from a traumatic experience to now having to coach the team, I can only imagine what that does to your psyche, to not have that decompression, that time in between, those transitions, And so can you tell us a little bit about just having those conscious transitions between allowing our nervous system to calm down, to regulate before we're even getting home and getting out of the car?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, what I started to do was I made sure that when I was in the car, that I would take my mind away from work, and I turned the car into a place where it was all about me for that ride. I didn't think about what I was doing next. I didn't think about too much of what I just came from. I just thought about myself and my breathing. And I probably shouldn't say this, but I do tapping when I drive. Because I can hold the steering wheel and I would do this and I would do the things. And I you can do it with one hand. I don't need to do two. And I would do that while I drove, and I would listen and I would decompress and I would give myself that time. And for me, it was so helpful because by the time I got to where I was going, I could be present again. I could be fully present. I could feel like my mind and my body calmed down and moved into that like rest and digest stage where I can recover my energy and I can be present for whatever it is I'm about to go do. And that was very life-changing and such a simple thing. So I just wanted to, share that with people.
Yeah. It's so helpful. Like you said, it really makes a difference to have somebody that understands it. And so having you in the app is such a gift. How do you encourage other first responders? I think it helps having you lead it. But what else do you say to first responders when it comes to giving this a try?
I guess you're starting to see this shift. It's almost like a grassroots movement because you can't really depend on departments to do this. Like, the NYPD does try, right? But they're so large that you can't, one of the things, like I used to train the entire NYPD on hazardous materials and stuff because after 9/11, everybody got sick. So they wanted the entire police department to have hazmat gear, but you can't legally have hazmat gear without training them. So trying to set up a training schedule for 37,000 people that had to get trained annually was insane. We had classes all day, and some of the classes were like 160 people at a time. Like, it's wild. So if you try to do something on this mass scale to reach people and to train them or incorporate it into some kind of like coping mechanisms, you just can't do it with a department that big. So you're starting to see that a lot of people are realizing how sick we are. We're realizing that our suicide rates have gone crazy. Our suicide rates are sadly astronomical. And COVID was a huge wake-up call because we're such a sick society, a first responder world especially. We have all these underlying comorbidities, like our blood pressure's too high, right? We have heart disease, we're overweight, we've got metabolic disorders. And those were the comorbidities that COVID was, killing. They're killing people with these comorbidities. And COVID wiped us out in a lot of ways. So we have all these, you're seeing these people, they're either killing themselves or they're sick, or you feel sick, or you feel burnt out. You don't see a light at the end of the tunnel. You still got 10 years to go. You're like, how can I leave? I need the pension. My family needs this. And the tension is growing so intently, especially with the last decade of, say, like anti-police rhetoric. It's like a pressure mounting. And the steam has to be let out. And I'm seeing so many things like this popping up in small groups, like this grassroots thing where people in the military and first responders, they are starting to say, we need to do this for ourselves. We need to take care of each other. And one of the greatest ways we can do that is to teach each other that, one, it's okay, and two, this is how you do it, and give them back their power.
Sam, thank you for creating these tapping meditations, for helping with that grassroots movement, for giving back their power, because no one can do it better than you can. And I'm so grateful for your service. And I'm so grateful for the way that you're showing up for people who need it most. how do you feel like, as someone outside of that world, right? How can I, as an individual, and for those who are listening, best support first responders? Obviously sharing tapping, sharing this free resource, but I'm just curious for myself. I see the struggle, and how could an individual be more supportive towards that community?
I mean, I guess just being kind, right? Like basic human reactions or emotions. Like, back to the original concept of treat people the way you want to be treated. And remember that, the news is the news. They're gonna always harp on the thing that's gonna sell the paper, that's gonna get you to click it's all about clickbait. And, the whole idea for humanity is to just not judge groups of people based on the actions of a few. And the people I've worked with over the years, yeah, I've worked with some people that I'm like, oh God, that guy, I can't stand that guy. We all have that. But for the most part, I've worked with these amazing people who, although they're flawed, as we all are, they have done amazing things. Very heroic, very selfless, and they show up. I mean, they show up when nobody else will show up. And they'll go in. I mean, they don't hesitate. Like, you just go. Like, no one ever thinks like, oh, maybe I shouldn't go in there, or maybe I shouldn't head that direction. They just do it. It's just like something that's built in. I don't know. So I guess just try to be kind. Try not to let the stuff you're inundated with form your opinion about an entire group of people, right? There's like 800,000 of us. And, so don't try to judge the entire group based on the act of less than 1%, or maybe right at 1%, but I don't think that's even hit 1%. And the other thing is, one thing I was blown away by was how diverse the NYPD is. I would challenge someone to find a more diverse workforce anywhere in the entire world. And I stood roll call like I was usually the minority. I mean, I had people next to me from all over the world. Yeah. And that was really cool because I got exposed to a ton of cultures.
Yeah.
And even just lifestyle, like, the whole LGBT, like that. They're so open and welcoming. It's just amazing how, I don't know, it's like this crazy melting pot and it just works.
Yeah.
So that was a pretty cool thing to experience.
It's such a great reminder to not, to be wary of what you're reading, to treat people as individuals, and to also show that kindness and that gratitude for the people who will not hesitate to enter when we need them most. Now, what advice do you have for those people in that position, your associates, your colleagues? If you could speak to everybody in all the police departments, and what message do you feel like they really need to hear right now?
That you're not alone, and that the things that you're experiencing or going through do not mean that you're weak, and it's completely normal. Whatever you're going through, wherever you're at, it's okay. Just meet yourself wherever you are and try to build a better life and be open to different avenues in which to do that.
That's beautiful. Sam, thank you so much for spending time with us and for creating these tapping meditations, and for the way that you show up in work and outside of work. I really appreciate it so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I mean, it's what you guys did was amazing. You pulled me in right away and we got these done, and you made them free for everyone out there who would need them. And I'm really grateful for that. Thank you.